So here's a video I definitely have to make. Hey, you know me, never one to say I didn't want to make this video, but here we go. I never consciously tried to bullshit my audience, you guys know that. I mean, if you didn't want to make the video, why did you make it in the first place? It just doesn't make any sense. So anyway, on to the actual topic of this video. I won't just be talking about some of the things I was debating on Twitter, but upon watching this video on the Patreon purges, I simply have to talk about the overarching theme that is present. That is, of course, the end of discourse and the beginning of battle. So first, onto Sargon and the mass exodus from Patreon. You all know that I have never minded people deleting or editing pledges on Patreon. It's your money. You do what you will. I am not in any position to tell you what to do, nor am I going to try to do so in this video. I will try to word it in a way that doesn't come across like that. So anyway, let's get stuck into this, shall we? Sargon awoke one morning to find that his Patreon account was deleted. He was banned, along with a hell of a lot of messages telling him about it. Now, why did Patreon suddenly decide to ban Sargon off of the platform? Someone who had been on there for many years and had never even broken the terms of service. Well, after many people emailed and tweeted at them, including Sargon, we finally got our answer. It was a months-old video clip of Sargon saying the N-word on Michelle Caitlin's stream. You know, the infamous one where he was insulting an audience of alt-right trolls, Nazis, and white supremacists, as well as people who just don't like him. Michelle herself is, not as far as I know, a member of the alt-right, and from the little I've interacted with her, she seems like a decent woman, and I think most of her audience are actually libertarians. But this is the reason why Sargon was banned. This one out of context clip where he criticises white nationalists and supremacists for the most part, not black people, but white people. Now, interestingly enough, what Sargon did is not technically against the Patreon TOS, which basically states, at least according to Jack Conte, that is, the only behaviour that is actually done on Patreon itself can be punished. Yet interestingly enough, his trust and safety team, yes, he has a trust and safety team, just like the Twitter Trust and Safety Council. Now to tell you all you need to know about the type of politics and person Conte is, and his associates within his team. This team decided, however, to invent a new rule, that is that anything outside of Patreon can be punished for whatever reason by Patreon. Now there is a rule that states that if you break American or any kind of sovereign law, you can be removed from Patreon. I believe that is a justification that Patreon gave for the banning of Lawrence Southern, but there's nothing to do with banned words as far as I know. But Sargon didn't do that, as far as anyone can see. He just said that naughty word. A naughty word he just happened to say outside of Patreon rather than on it. And for the record, the other people banned, Milo and James Alsop, also have not seemed to have done anything wrong in the real world, so where did Patreon get this footage from? Well, I would ignore most of what people have been saying, as to paraphrase my friend Ozya, nobody really knows who actually did it. And those of us, people like Tim Pool accusing groups or even individuals, are simply spouting conjecture. However, I will definitely trust Sargon on who he himself thinks did it, because he actually provided evidence of a group who may have done it. Basically, from what I could gather, it was the same group of alt-right trolls he was in the war with for months. Apparently, there was even a paste bin circulating of every comment he ever said, out of context, that could easily be called racist, sexist, homophobic, politically incorrect, you name it. If it is true, it is really funny to see these types of people use the same tactics as the other group of extremists they are supposed to be against. And it's also very funny to see Patreon also use this evidence, or at least part of it, from that other group of extremists they are supposed to be against. I guess international socialists and national socialists really do have a lot in common. This revelation also gave me pause for thought as to who else could have been involved, but I'm not going to wave any fingers at people. Sargon unwittingly, however, sent shockwaves through the Patreon community as well as those of us in the political sphere of YouTube and beyond. Backers and creators alike have been abandoning the site in droves and have mostly been moving to a site called Subscribestar, which from all appearances seems to be a Patreon alternative with a different layout essentially. Here's where I differ from a hell of a lot of people, and I veer more on tailed feature side of the argument, if there even is one. Basically, there's been a lot of talk that now is the time, now is the moment to abandon Patreon before it's too late and to jump ship and start up all over again on other platforms. Basically take a risk, and people have already done it. Unfortunately, this was to the detriment of a lot of creators, big and small, as they saw their Patreons dwindle in quite a sharp turn. I can't say for certain how big the hit was for everybody, but it largely depends on your context and situation. I myself have never really been reliant on Patreon for a year or two now since I gained full employment, but nonetheless, I still use it to supplement my income to buy food, equipment, books, etc. for not only myself, but for the channel. I don't actively push it either, but with a history video on horizon, I was thinking of pushing it to you guys so I could afford the books and material for research. But with Patreon, the way it is and the mass exodus, I have to rethink that. Don't worry, I'm not blaming anybody, but I am urging caution. For starters, people like me and Tailfeature are not against people jumping ship and taking to new platforms. We should be diversifying our revenue sources as much as we can. However, In light of maker support, which is a scam by the way, and I can't speak for anyone else, the idea of just completely abandoning Patreon and taking what is a massive risk not only for myself but for you, my fans, especially patrons, financially, I can't just do it without first making a judgment on sites like Subscribestar. But when I raised these concerns, I largely got a negative reaction, not nasty or anything, but emotional and certainly passionate, but not entirely logical. Basically, I ought to leave Patreon because in the end, it is going to come for me. Yes, they probably will, but I am going to make sure that I at least vet my new income sources before I leave or when they finally get me. I'm not against staying on Patreon. People forget that when Maker Support arrived and Patreon temporarily increased some cost thing, I can't remember exactly what it was, I deleted my original Patreon and moved entirely to Maker Support. I've done what people have told me to do, and I inadvertently cost my supporters some money. I got the sense from some of the people that if I did not up and leave right now, I was being a coward and a cook, and that I was against leaving Patreon and wanted to stay on in the vain hope of not getting banned. Listen, I've fucking taken this risk before, and I will do so again. That argument does not work on me, only I will take the risk in my own way, and not your way. I do not think my principles are in any way being conceded because of money. I'm weighing my options, and I won't blindly follow people to what could be an edge of the cliff. Also, I saw some rather weird rhetoric from Six Hexenhammer, where he was basically saying to Tail Feature that the ends justify the means. Well, not even Sargon agrees with that, and urged people to repledge on Patreon. Personally, I would not have gone that far, as you know, I don't mind. You made your choice. I'll live with it. But I do advise, at least for now, until your favourite creators are settled on their new platforms or revenue services, and sites like Subscribestar turn out not to be scams or are wiped off the face of the net like VidMe, at least grin and bear Patreon. I'm right now considering Subscribestar, PayPal, even Bitcoin. The latter is something I need help with from my libertarian or Bitcoin loving subscribers. Hit me up if you want to help me, by the way. But anyway, on to the final part of this video. The implications of the purge. Are Patreon really doing this because Sargon said a naughty word, or is this the justification for censorship of an ideological enemy, or just a person who, ideologically even, is trouble to keep around because of the culture of not only Silicon Valley, where it's seen as dangerous, harmful, hateful even, to have people who have views outside of the mainstream on one's platform? Personally, I believe, much like what has happened over at Tumblr and other mainstream websites, Patreon is being pressured by political, cultural, and economic forces, for example, big business or big tech, and the progressive left, into doing this. They may also be willing, as it's pretty clear they also share this ideological bias, but nonetheless, the pressure to purge is still exacted. All of this is done to stifle discussion and discourse on the most important and most controversial topics of our day. Feminism, immigration, the economy, culture, nationalism, national sovereignty, rights of the individual, freedom of speech, freedom of thought. I could literally go on and on and on. These are topics that either the establishment does not want us to talk about, or they want to frame and manage in such a way that only the opinions and discourse that they approve of is allowed on the internet. Hell, it's not just in the cyberspaces that this is happening. Look at Europe and other countries that aren't America, at least. Not yet. You never know, Americans. Stay vigilant. They have hate speech laws, or have even outright banned certain topics of discussion, and as Razorfist pointed out, probably what caused the Gilets Jaunes riots was the French establishment ending discourse on the very issues that these working and middle class people wanted to address. When you have no way of verbally expressing what you want to express, be it positive or negative, the only outcome can only be violent. You cannot speak your mind, so the only way you get your voice heard is to get out onto the streets and start breaking shit. And that, my friends, is the most worrying part of it all. The fact we may be so far gone that events like Gilets Jaunes, all the way to even events like Portland and Charlottesville, even things that have happened here in the UK, are edging Western society just one step closer to societal chaos and violence. And where does that lead us? Well, hopefully we come to our senses in time and stop the violence or prevent it outright from occurring. Or, as history has shown, though not outright repeated, as it never really does repeat itself, it only creates slightly different versions of similar events, societal and civilizational collapse can occur. Not a good thought, is it?